Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into one of the most dramatic and potentially game-changing developments in the ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia. Reports suggest that Ukraine has managed to shatter what has been known as Vladimir Putin's strategic corridor to Crimea, a critical supply and transport link that has long symbolized Russia's control and dominance in the region. This moment could mark a serious shift in the course of the war and in the balance of power across the Black Sea. To understand the significance of this event, it's important to remember why Crimea and the surrounding southern regions matter so much. When Russia annexed Crimea back in 2014, it did more than just seize a piece of land. It took over a strategic position that allows control over the Black Sea, giving Moscow influence over trade routes, naval operations, and even the security of nearby nations. Since then, Crimea has been heavily militarized and turned into one of the most fortified areas under Russian control. Ukraine has never accepted the annexation and has always viewed Crimea as part of its sovereign territory. For years, Kiev has worked toward isolating the peninsula and cutting off the supply lines that connect it to Russia. This is what makes the idea of a strategic corridor so important. For Russia, that corridor, stretching through occupied southern Ukraine, was the vital link that allowed it to keep Crimea supplied, reinforced, and economically viable. Without it, the peninsula becomes much harder to hold. The corridor consisted of a network of land routes, railways, bridges, and occupied territories that formed a continuous connection from Russia's mainland across the southern Ukrainian regions like Zaporizhzhia and Kherson all the way to Crimea. For Moscow, maintaining control over this corridor was essential for moving troops, weapons, and resources to and from the peninsula. For Ukraine, breaking it meant weakening Russia's logistical and symbolic grip on Crimea. Ukraine's recent operations have shown remarkable precision and coordination. Over the past months, Ukrainian forces have targeted critical infrastructure, including bridges, railways, fuel depots, and communication lines that form the backbone of Russia's supply chain. Some of these strikes have been deep within occupied territory, made possible by advanced long-range missile systems supplied by Western allies. Each successful strike adds another layer of pressure on Russian logistics and undermines their ability to sustain large-scale military operations in the south. The most symbolic target of all has been the Crimean Bridge, also known as the Kerch Bridge. It connects mainland Russia to the Crimean Peninsula and has served as both a logistical artery and a political trophy for Putin. Since the war began, the bridge has been hit multiple times by Ukrainian strikes, damaging key sections and forcing Russia to divert resources for constant repairs and protection. Each attack on this structure doesn't just disrupt supplies. It also delivers a psychological blow, showing the world that Ukraine can reach into what Russia once claimed was untouchable territory. Ukraine's military strategy here is methodical. Rather than rushing into large-scale frontal assaults, Ukrainian forces are focusing on strangling the logistical lifelines that keep Russian troops operating. By targeting depots, transport routes, and command centers, they are slowly cutting off the artery that feeds Russia's southern front. This method reduces the need for costly battles while still achieving strategic gains. It's a war of attrition, but on Ukraine's terms. The terrain of southern Ukraine plays a key role in this development. The land bridge to Crimea is geographically narrow, leaving limited routes for heavy equipment and supply movement. This makes it easier for Ukraine to target and disrupt. Each destroyed bridge or railway section forces Russia to reroute supplies through longer and more vulnerable paths, many of which fall within range of Ukrainian missiles and drones. As these disruptions continue, Russia faces increasing logistical challenges. Fuel shortages, delayed reinforcements, and strained supply chains weaken the effectiveness of its frontline troops. Reports have indicated that Russian soldiers in parts of the occupied territories are already experiencing shortages of ammunition and rations. Without a stable corridor, sustaining military pressure becomes far more difficult, and morale begins to crumble. For Russia, this corridor has been more than a military lifeline. It's a symbol of political pride. Putin personally oversaw the construction of the Crimean Bridge and celebrated it as proof that Crimea was permanently integrated into Russia. To see that connection now under threat is a massive embarrassment for the Kremlin. It sends a message both domestically and internationally that Russia's grip on Crimea is not as secure as it has claimed. On the Ukrainian side, the success of these operations boosts morale and national confidence. After years of fighting against a larger and better equipped army, each victory that disrupts Russian logistics is seen as proof of Ukraine's growing capability and resilience. It also strengthens Kyiv's position with its Western allies, showing that the military aid and intelligence support provided are being put to effective use. The psychological effect of these strikes cannot be overstated. Every successful attack on the corridor undermines the narrative that Russia's occupation is permanent. It reminds both Russian troops and the Russian public that Crimea remains contested and vulnerable. This erosion of confidence has ripple effects across the entire Russian military campaign. Commanders are forced to rethink supply routes, reallocate air defenses, and even shift troops away from other fronts just to protect what's left of the corridor. Western intelligence and technology have played a crucial role in enabling Ukraine's recent successes. Satellite imagery, real-time targeting data, and long-range weaponry have made it possible to strike deep within occupied territory. Systems like the Storm Shadow and ATACMS missiles give Ukraine the ability to reach strategic targets far beyond the front lines. Each precision strike not only damages infrastructure, but also sends a clear message that no part of the corridor is truly safe. At the same time, Russia is scrambling to adapt. The Kremlin has ordered urgent repairs, increased air defense coverage, and deployed additional forces to protect what remains of its southern supply routes. There are reports of Russia using ferry systems and alternate roads to bypass destroyed sections of the corridor, but these alternatives are slower, less efficient, and more vulnerable to further attacks. Maintaining the illusion of stability becomes harder with every passing week. The disruption of the corridor also affects Russia's naval and air operations. Crimea houses key air bases and the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet. When supply routes are disrupted, the ability to maintain and equip those assets is severely reduced. Ukraine's increasing ability to strike targets in and around Sevastopol, the heart of Russia's naval operations, further compounds the problem. Even Russian warships are being relocated due to the rising threat of Ukrainian missile and drone attacks. Beyond the battlefield, the collapse of Russia's strategic corridor has wider geopolitical consequences. It challenges Moscow's narrative of inevitable victory and permanence in Crimea, while reinforcing Ukraine's image as a capable and determined defender of its sovereignty. For NATO and the European Union, this development validates their continued support and signals that the balance of power in the Black Sea region is shifting. If Ukraine can maintain pressure and continue to disrupt Russian logistics, it could eventually isolate Crimea to the point where sustaining a large military presence there becomes unsustainable. In practical terms, that would mean fewer reinforcements reaching Russian troops, limited supplies of ammunition and fuel, and growing frustration within Russian ranks. Over time, Crimea could transform from a stronghold into a liability for Moscow. However, this is not without risks. Russia has demonstrated time and again that it is willing to escalate when faced with setbacks. We can expect an increase in missile attacks, drone strikes, and retaliatory bombardments aimed at Ukrainian infrastructure. The Kremlin will try to punish Ukraine for every success, both to restore deterrence and to send a message to its domestic audience. Yet, with each retaliatory strike, Russia expends valuable resources and exposes its own vulnerabilities. The battle for the strategic corridor is ultimately a battle for time and endurance. Ukraine doesn't need to destroy every single route. It just needs to make them unreliable. The longer Russia struggles to keep supplies flowing, the more its combat effectiveness declines. War is as much about logistics as it is about firepower, and Ukraine is proving that by targeting the arteries instead of the muscles. Looking ahead, the next few months will be crucial. If Ukraine continues to strike effectively and the West maintains its flow of military aid, the collapse of the corridor could become irreversible. Once that happens, Crimea's isolation will be complete, and Russia's ability to hold the peninsula may begin to erode from within. It would represent a turning point, not just in this war, but in the broader struggle for control and influence in Eastern Europe. The situation also has deep psychological implications for the Russian leadership. Putin has built much of his domestic legitimacy on the idea of restoring Russia's greatness and reclaiming what he sees as historic territories. Losing control over the land bridge to Crimea undermines that image completely. It calls into question the narrative that Russia's actions have strengthened its position, when in reality they may be hastening strategic decline. For ordinary Russians, the growing number of attacks inside Crimea and the visible failures of the corridor will become harder to ignore. Propaganda can only conceal so much when images of damaged bridges, burning depots, and retreating troops spread online. These realities feed public doubt and anxiety, which in the long term could influence internal stability within Russia. Meanwhile, for Ukraine, every blow dealt to the corridor strengthens national unity and determination. The idea of reclaiming Crimea, once dismissed as impossible, now feels closer than ever. Even if full liberation remains distant, the ability to cripple Russia's logistical lifeline is already a monumental achievement. It shows that Ukraine can not only defend, but also strategically disrupt one of the most powerful militaries in the world. This development also changes how other countries perceive the conflict. Western governments are increasingly confident that supporting Ukraine is yielding real, measurable results. The perception of Ukraine as an underdog holding its ground has evolved into an image of a nation capable of strategic brilliance and resilience. That perception fuels continued military and economic assistance, creating a positive feedback loop that further strengthens Ukraine's position. In the end, the shattering of Putin's strategic corridor to Crimea represents more than a tactical victory. It's a symbol of how the dynamics of this war have shifted. What once seemed like a fixed front line is now fluid. What once looked like an irreversible occupation now appears vulnerable. The war has entered a new phase, one where logistics, intelligence, and precision strikes can determine the outcome as much as territorial control. Ukraine's ability to disrupt the corridor demonstrates that persistence, innovation, and international support can counter even the most entrenched positions. It's a reminder that no empire, no matter how powerful, is immune to strategic vulnerability. Crimea, once the crown jewel of Russia's 2014 expansion, now stands as the focal point of its greatest strategic challenge. As events unfold, the world will be watching closely. Will Russia manage to re-establish its corridor, or will Ukraine tighten the noose and isolate Crimea completely? The answer could redefine not only the course of this war, but the security architecture of the entire region for decades to come. Thank you for watching, everyone. If you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more in-depth updates, and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Ukraine can hold this momentum and keep Crimea isolated, or will Russia find a way to adapt and rebuild? Let's discuss below, and I'll see you in the next video.